And we're live.
Cool.
Can you still hear me all right? We ain't getting any buzzes today, are we?
It's perfect, dude.
Ah, excellent.
Don't
That's what I
mess it
like to
up.
hear. I'll try not to. I just can't touch anything. But I like to move my hands around when I talk.
Yeah, that's
The
okay.
high chance of me knocking the mic over.
That's okay.
um, well, so we are moving on to Carl Jung, Modern Man in Search of Soul, Chapter 3, The Aims of Psychotherapy. And that is what our reflection will be on today. So I have a couple things underlined in the beginning. I feel like the beginning of the chapter was a little bit more of a um, recap, kind of,
Mm-hmm.
because like I noticed that there were some repeating points that he's talked about in other chapters. Um, just reestablishing that the immense amount of unknown territory in regards to therapy, and that the synthesis of many different perspectives is an extremely important thing to obtain a more accurate view of what could be going on and just give you a larger toolbox to deal with varying cases of um, psychic dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
I mean, real quick on that, I just want to talk about that. I appreciate that he kind of does recap some of the stuff, like because he brings up Freud and he brings up Adler, and they have two very different theories, and he kind of acknowledges the fact that many times one theory or the other, and I guess at this time, which was probably closer to like 1930s or something like that, um, these two theories were kind of like so apparent in people's psychological problems, and like the framework and the theories fit a lot of people. So he's saying like there's a lot of times that if I have some of this highlighted, hold on. Freud's explanation of the neuroses in terms of sexual causation and his view that the happenings in the psyche turn especially upon infantile pleasure and its satisfaction should be instructive to the psychologist. So again, when there's problems, leaning that way, like he's saying, like don't you don't have to go outside of Freud's theory if that solves the problem with that particular client or patient. And the same thing for like Adler's view, which was like inferiority and superiority, like conflicts. Um, he was saying like use it until it doesn't fit, right? And then he's saying
Mm-hmm.
like there's just like you were bringing up, there's so much unexplored territory,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's one of the most important things is when it doesn't work, right? When that framework does not fit the client, don't force it. And then he's just opening up the door to saying, like, there's a lot more unexplored territory. Um, and again, I just think that's something, especially in a position of moving forward in this career, like, just to understand that, and not to like, if sometimes if it's something as simple as, hey, this really does feel like Freud's theory applies, just go with it. You know what I mean? um
Mm-hmm.
I just think that's important.
There's another note that I wanted to make is that he talked about how Freud's focus on sexual repression kind of has its own specific history, stemming from out of the post-Victorian period, where sexual repression was, I guess you could say, a very huge part of the culture, and just conserving yourself, so to speak, and not indulging in um, pleasures of sex or hedonistically, so to speak. And I think that's like, because what he said was Freud is one of the exponents of a present day psychic predisposition that has a special history of its own, but for obvious reasons, we can't go into that history here. So it's like there's um, and like even with Adler's too, it's like you see these they all of these developments have like a historical timeline where it might have been more prevalent at one point based on societal uh, factors and what was going on, and which gave it more well, made it more prevalent and then allowed us to understand it and articulate it. But and that's what's so what I think is so fascinating to me about psychology and learning about different theories is that there's a history behind them, and as you understand more, it just gives you insights into um, other parts or unknown aspects of psychic function and just understanding in and of itself, not just for the sake of curing neurosis,
Yeah.
because we
Yeah.
are historical creatures.
Yeah, he also uses all this stuff about Freud and Adler and like to kind of introduce the idea of the collective psyche, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is really cool. Because he says, like, the end of that quote was, it shows him that this manner of thinking and feeling coincides with a relatively widespread tendency or spiritual current which, quite apart from Freud's theory, has appeared in other places, in other circumstances, in various minds, and in different forms. So again, that kind of like encompasses what the collective psyche is kind of all about,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's happening, um, like it's happening within many different people in different places, so that it's something that is very identifiable. And that's where I think it's he's saying like Freud's theory has value in that it's something that you can identify. And when you do identify it in somebody, don't try to, if I guess this is where, like, if you were purely following Adler's view and it was something that seemed to line up with Freud's, you wouldn't even look for it. You wouldn't even understand it because you wouldn't identify it as that. You'd be trying to force Adler's view and saying, no, there has to be something else. You know what I mean? It can't
Mm-hmm.
be related to sexual things. It has to be some sense of inferiority and like, we're going to keep digging. And it's like, now you're just making stuff up, It's like just to fit what you think it is. Um, Without identifying different when different theories kind of um not have the answer, but I don't know, are more appropriate, I guess is a way of
Mm-hmm.
saying it.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, I mean, 100%. I agree completely.
Yeah.
Um, and he does. I mean, this doesn't just apply to psychotherapists, but here's a little quote. It applies to, I mean, everything. Just it's a principle that you could say is kind of more of a meta principle that transgresses um, and that displays itself in many different aspects of being. He says, but the psychotherapist learns little or nothing from his successes. They mainly confirm him in his mistakes, while his failures, on the other hand, are priceless experiences in that they not only open up the way to deeper truth, but force him to change his views and methods.
Boom. I had that highlighted too.
That was a good one.
That is
It's just
good.
a principle for life
Yeah,
in
seriously.
any endeavor.
Seriously, and I think just like the end, but force him to change his views and methods, right? And I think this
Mhm,
kind of relates to this theme that keeps coming up in a lot of our conversations, which is like things are constantly changing.
mhm,
So even, to be living at this point in history, um, all the cultural things that we experience, um, like technology and how we respond to that, and where we're at politically, all these things have a huge influence on our behavior. And again, like, things change over time. And yeah, I think it's just always reminding yourself that, like, I like what you said, like, unexplored territory is like we're figuring out a lot of stuff, but there's always going to be, new things to figure out too, as
mhm.
things continue to change. um yeah, I don't know, that was a good quote though. I do love that.
It's very exciting. There's always going to be. new discoveries to be made and new meaning to be found in our life. Oh, there's something I wanted to say. I forget what I was going to say.
Well, while you're thinking of it, that quote does kind of like lead up to his idea of his aims of psychotherapy, right? Because he's kind of just like ends up describing this approach that says, yeah, there are some theories that are valid and reliable and um, they work, but he's also saying like he his aim of psychotherapy is to take it a step further, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's kind of cool. Like sometimes I don't feel like he's explicit when he's saying what my aims are, but he like describes these things that I guess kind of do describe it. I guess.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I got kind of like the same idea when I was reading. Man, what was I gonna say? I forget. Maybe it'll come up later. I'm just gonna let it go because I'm sure as soon as I forget about it, it'll just pop into my head again. I'll just have to trust my unconscious to percolate it up into my consciousness.
It'll come to you.
Hmm. The next thing that I noticed where he kind of dives into is like distinguishing between uh, younger people and older people, and kind of um, differences in a stage that they can find themselves in. Um, like for younger people, uh, it's something like how to adapt and move into society and become normal to a degree, or mainly become normal and to function. Whereas older people, it seems like what he's saying is that they've been there, done that, and you could say it's become so redundant and repetitive that it's losing its meaning, um, and that they need to that where they generally find themselves is as kind of a rediscovery of meaning through their own individuality rather than on a societal level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have a bunch of stuff highlighted just talking about um, what characterizes like young people doing exactly what you said, and the older one, older generation. Um, I feel like I have a quote that I wanted to read. Yeah, I mean, I guess like you sum that up pretty well, but he does say like the age of the patient seems to me therefore a most important indicium.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he says later too something about how he uses that word. But again, I think like he's really just saying like it's a really important thing to acknowledge. Um, and then again, I feel like this kind of goes hand in hand with that idea that it's a trend, right? Like it's very apparent in both age groups that these things are more or less happening, you know? And so it's something that you should almost already be prepared to kind of recognize within your patient when they come in and um,
Mm-hmm.
already have a good idea or like at least understand that the age is going to have a huge impact on maybe the course of therapy and how it should go.
Yeah, I mean, what he kind of reflected on indicum and how he used that word for a little bit, and like not necessarily that it indicates any specific given method of treatment, but just that it's something that plays a factor in the development of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was kind of it seemed to me like what he was trying to say is that like it's still very unknown and how to deal with it because it will probably vary significantly on an individual basis. But to recognize it in and of itself is to bring it forth under the light and just to illuminate it. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that that could hold value in and of itself. There's and kind of, I guess there's two quotes I can read from him that I think kind of give a little summary of what he's been trying to say in this relationship between the beginning of your life versus the end of your life, so to speak, or the latter half. It seems to me that the elements of the psyche undergo in the course of life a very marked change, so much so that we may distinguish between a psychology of the morning of life and a psychology of its afternoon. Um, as a rule, the life of a younger person is characterized by a general unfolding and striving towards concrete ends. His neurosis, if he develops one, can be traced to his hesitation or his shrinking back from this necessity. But the life of an older person is marked by a contradiction of forces, the affirmation of what has been achieved, and the curtailment of further growth. What was a normal goal for the young man inevitably becomes a neurotic hindrance to the older one. Um, but in regards to this, I guess I don't really have to um, too much more to add on to it.
I feel like you like skipped a part too. Again, like it's funny, like as we were like talking about this today, I always feel like just reading some of these, it's almost like it's difficult to say something because he words it so like everything he says is a lot more profound, and I feel like it
Mm-hmm.
makes sense to me, and I don't want to just restate what he's saying, but that's why I love just like reading his quotes sometimes. But the
Mm-hmm.
part that you skipped over too was um just as the youthful neurotic is afraid of life, so the older one shrinks back from death. Um, and that's one of those things, like in a sentence, it kind of gives you an idea of what is happening in both of those age groups, right? Um,
Oh, I did skip that. Oh, thank
yeah,
you. That's a good one. I had it
yeah,
underlined too.
yeah. And it's like, man, it's like that is kind of the like trajectory, right? And like the perspective. Um, and I would say generally, like you were saying, generally, like there's going to be some individual differences here and there, some
Mm-hmm.
outliers, but yeah, on like, and I feel like he has so much experience that he's saying this is what I notice, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
like when he says, a most important indicium, like for me, I think he's stating I've experienced this so much that I'm saying this takes priority.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the next page after that, he says something along the lines of like, when we use the word indicium, it might appear to mean, as in medical parlance generally, that this or that treatment is indicated.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps this should be the case, but psychotherapy has assuredly reached no such degree of certainty, for which reason our indicia are unfortunately not much more than mere warnings against one-sidedness. I guess maybe that's not exactly what I'm to read because he goes into something else. But
Oh, well, no, I mean it's related to a degree.
yeah, but yeah, just important things to pick up on that kind of give you a better idea of what it is that the person's going through, so that you can start almost so that you can start from a place where a you already have an understanding, like, and I think as the psychotherapist, that is the goal, is to be a person that already has a really good understanding of these things that the client is unaware of, because it's your job to navigate through all that, right? And then I feel like on an individual level, although your um, circumstances and what it is that you're experiencing and going through might be slightly different, like there are certain things that are not different between people, which again goes back to that idea of this manifestation of the collective psyche, is that in some way we're all experiencing the same thing, but we're also experiencing it differently in our own way, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like both.
I love it. And like to like provide some background, like he wrote this book more in you could say, I guess, the latter half of his life. Um, And by that point, he had a tremendous amount of um, experience in the clinical setting with people. And like you said, like that's kind of like it's the feeling that I get out of reading it, and how he says everything is like, look, it's like over the course of 15, 20 years, these are patterns that have emerged consistently across them.
Right.
And it's just invaluable, or maybe that is that the right way of describing it? It's priceless information.
Yeah.
I think it's something like wisdom that's obtained from experience. And so I
Yeah.
really enjoy reading his work.
Oh yeah.
I was terrified of it for a while, just from like the stories that I hear about. You know, Peterson's like, yeah, I read whatever of Jung, and it took me about a year to read that book and understand it.
He just made it really intimidating for you.
Well, I think this is also like an easier book of his to
Yeah.
read, um, but I've been enjoying it, and I am excited. We'll have to definitely dive into like the Red Book. I heard that one's an interesting one.
I don't even know what that is.
It's his recollection of uh, experiences with like active imagination, basically
Hmm.
discussions that he's had within his daydreams. And
Okay.
um, yeah, because he's very active. Like he could daydream and have multiple figures come up or be created in those daydreams, I guess. Well, were his unconscious, so to speak, or how he saw them, and how he would have full-blown conversations with them.
Hmm.
And they're like recollections and reflections of that, I believe. I'm not positive because I haven't read it, but I think that's what Jake's told me before.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, though.
Hmm. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll get us back on,
Yeah.
back on track here. So yeah, I mean, to me, it's just like it is. I guess having an interest in this book and what it has to offer is definitely going to influence me if I, take on this position as a therapist of my own. And it's like he brings up the age thing. Then he also brings up an attitude, extroversion versus introversion.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're getting like a glimpse of him interacting with people that are embodying these personality traits. And again, he's saying it's something that seems to pop up. Um, he says, as this question of psychic constitution, it is well known that I postulate two different basic attitudes in accordance with typical differences already suspected by many students of human nature, the extroverted and the introverted attitudes. These attitudes I also take to be important indicia, as likewise the predominance of a particular psychic function over other functions. And I think that sentence again just really sums up like how important it is, right? Like it's kind of like the attitude is serving a purpose that's more at the forefront of what's influencing your behavior and your thoughts and how you interact with the world more so than other things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of, he's acknowledging that and saying it's something that's important. Um,
Yeah, it definitely like it's going to create, you could say, predispositions to, well, that's what they are, is they're predispositioned uh, responses to the environment and how you're going to act in it. Like, I mean, if you're extroverted, you get more energy out of social situations and being more social. So you could say, I mean, I'm just speculating, this could be wrong, but like what comes to mind for me is that if you're an extroverted individual, one a weakness, so to speak, of that characteristic is losing your individuality in the crowd, because you're always, if you're always with people and never spend time by yourself, or not, it's not like a long period of time, but just time, you can, I feel like you can kind of lose touch with, well, your individuality and your values, and they can be merged into the herd, so to speak.
mm-hmm.
Whereas if you're more introverted, um, your ability to navigate in the social world um, is much more difficult. And I think it requires you to develop skills when you're interacting with people. And I think that if you never really develop those skills of interaction and understand how um, uh, how that introverted disposition is affecting you, and then it can kind of lead to a denial of the social world, and kind of like a a fallback into isolation within like yourself. Like I feel like I've seen it with specific people who are very introverted.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, oh, there's something else I wanted to say. Oh, but like here's like for an example, like tools, so to speak. Um, like if you're very introverted and you go to a party, like I have an introverted, I'd say I'm it's not super introverted, but I am probably more introverted than extroverted. And you know, if I'm at a party or I'm with a bunch of people who none of which I know, then my positioning is on the outskirt of the crowd in corners, or so to speak, and kind of like not making eye contact with people. You kind of, or what I would find myself doing is like kind of look down, or like, do my own thing, so to speak, without making eye contact. And so what you're doing, what happens in that state is that um, you're all of your focus, and it's all being turned inward, self-consciousness. And it's like, even like if when you're in a group of people, a way out of that, or one very useful skill, I'm pretty sure I got it from Peterson, um, but it's to focus on other people. Because when you're in that, you're like, oh, what is this person? You give yourself, you let yourself marinate in self-consciousness of what is this person thinking about me? Or are they looking at me? And you're not even looking at what they're doing. And none of
Mm-hmm.
them are thinking any of that or even paying attention to you,
Mm-hmm.
because you're hidden in the back kind of, and shy, and look like you don't want to be talked to. But if you make eye contact and make the focal point the other person, and become interested in that person, and even when you're in a group of people, you're not talking to the group, you're talking to individuals within the group. And
Mm-hmm.
if you so you don't look at the group, you look at individuals within it. And by talking, and you allow one person to give you the feedback for the group, so to speak. And that's just a way of breaking that loop of self-conscious feedback that can be, I mean, from my experience, paralyzing.
Yeah.
Even like with talking to a girl or something.
Mm-hmm.
For some guys, it's like if you pull that focus off of you and put it into the conversation and into the other person, it can break that loop.
Right. Yeah, I like that. One of the things that you said initially that made me think of this was like, well, I guess just comparing both extroversion and introversion is um, like you said something about values, and like you can lose your values when you kind of conform and merge into, you know, the larger crowd, right? So in the other way, it's almost like an introvert kind of just has a very maybe limited view, or like even more of
Mhm.
like a position that, they're not really, how do I want to say this? I feel like I don't know the words today. They're very like stuck in their position, right? Like they may not have many values, but the ones they do have, they hold very strong to, because I guess like what I'm saying is no one can test them, like there's no one to throw other ideas at you, because you're never putting yourself out there in the social world. So it's like you're fine with the values that you have because they work for you in your very isolated world. But when you go out and then all these other ideas, I can imagine that almost being kind of overwhelming.
Mhm.
And and I feel like taken to its extreme almost reinforces the behavior of not putting yourself out there, because you just are kind of being affected by everyone else's ideas of how things should be, right, and what they
Mhm.
value. And it's like, if you don't want to hear that, it's like, well, don't put myself around them, right? It gives you another reason to say, this is why I don't hang out with people. When even though you're introverted, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't put yourself out there. It just means maybe you should be more selective, which is, it could be healthy. if someone's truly introverted. But at the same time, you can't completely isolate yourself either, because then I feel like that's where something might um, develop into some sort of neurosis when
Hmm.
you're not doing anything besides being completely isolated and withdrawn from the world.
I love that. Yeah, I agree. And we've definitely hit on some weaknesses of both, but in the end, they both hold a niche. And
Mm-hmm.
so for what I believe an introvert's niche is self understanding and self exploration, because it's, to me at least, if because I feel like I am more extroverted or more introverted than extroverted, but and I feel like the balance between that is, and how introverted versus extroverted I am is, how much time I spend with people and how much time I spend by myself. Where if I'm spending time with people too much, like for example, I am leaving tomorrow to go on vacation with my extended family. There's like 25 of us. Um, we're all going to be in a house together for a whole week, and by the end of that, I'm going to be in a position where I need some time to myself to kind of rejuvenate my spirit, um and so there's like, and that revitalizes me. But if I stay too long, I do feel like I need to interact um a little as well with others too.
Mm-hmm.
But you could say it's almost the opposite for extroverts, where if they spend too much time by themselves, there's more of this push where I need that fuel of the social game, because you love it.
Right.
And it gives you an idea for, it's like, what jobs would you excel in for an extrovert? It's like salesperson in any kind of way, or some people jobs that have to do with, that are, that you, where you're involved with interacting with people. Introverted jobs would probably be more, well, where you're not interacting with a lot of people
Yeah.
throughout your job, because that could drain you, and it will drain you if you're extremely introverted, most likely,
Mm-hmm.
because it's going to take a lot. And but I think, like, even though, like, as what modern psychology seems to think is that, like, you can't really adjust those personality traits very much, like increase your level of extroversion or decrease it. um, I don't necessarily think that's true. I think you can move them a little bit. I don't think you can move them a significant amount. But what I do think you can do is develop the tools that allow you to exercise yourself in both niches.
Yeah.
And I think that's something like, I think that's a form of like embodied wisdom.
Yeah. No, I really like that. I want to note that real quick, like mental note, because I want to say something about you're going on this trip, but also I was going to say something along the lines of I think some people don't consider, maybe not that they don't consider it, but maybe don't really think too much about it, about how extroverted or introverted they really are and what it really means. Yeah, what it really means, right? Like, and maybe coming away from an experience, like let's just say in a slightly introvert, someone that's slightly more introverted comes home from an experience and says like, man, I'm really drained, but they don't consider that, right? They don't consider, man, I spent too much time with people, and they're just, maybe there's a handful of things that might be the reason, but like they don't even consider it. It's like trying to analyze some of those situations, like I feel like could be so important to really see like what is it about being around people, what is it that's so draining, right? Is it how many people you're around, who you're with, the kind of environment that you're in with those people, you know what I mean? I feel like there's a lot of things that go into that
Hmm.
that that are responsible for depleting that energy, um a lot quicker than an extrovert. And another thing I was going to say is like I work in the food industry,
Me as well.
food and service industry. So it's like I do get stimulated by being around people, but I also notice that I'm a lot more stimulated when it's like good energy, right? Like when I'm
Hmm.
involved with people and I walk up to a table and they're smiling and they're polite and
Hmm.
like and like it's just like fills me with energy, right? And it allows me to keep going longer. And it's like, yeah, I could do this job all night if that was the case. But then there's some nights where it's like I still feel like I'm slightly more extroverted, but I just don't want to be around people at all because I'm just getting like bad vibes. It's almost like it's weird. It's like in that night in itself that could deplete my energy quicker. Yet that doesn't make me an introvert just because I come home that night and go, man, I need
Hmm.
my space from people. You know what I mean? So it's
Hmm.
like
It's
just
another level of complexity that you just talked about with it.
exactly. It just it does get really complex.
Hmm.
And then I was gonna say with you brought up going on a trip, and you also brought up this idea of like tool set, which for me just says like, hey, when I figure out something like what I'm describing, where we're getting very specific, right? Within my
Hmm.
job, within your trip with family and being around people in that type of environment, now we're
Hmm.
getting very specific. And it's like, okay, which tool do I need to get out of the tool bag? And what I mean by that is, what have I learned about being in this situation before? You
Hmm.
know, have you been on another trip with the same extended family before?
Every
And
year.
right. And do you know what are some of the triggers, right?
Oh, of course. I've got.
Who's gonna say something that's gonna tick you off, or how much time do you is you know generally how much time is it before you're really starting to like have
Hmm.
some like weird physiological responses and like you're just like I can't fucking handle this anymore, right? It's like only you're gonna know that. So your tool is gonna be trying to figure out setting personal boundaries, giving yourself
Hmm.
some space, because if you just go to the trip every year and you're like, well, I'm just gonna suck it up and I'm gonna experience all the negative stuff, and then I'm gonna come home and take, you know, a bunch of time to myself. Sometimes I don't feel like that's the right answer either, because you didn't figure out how to manage that in the moment. You know?
My tool set in going in is my mornings.
Okay.
My mornings will be my time of rejuvenation, so to speak, where I'll do some reading, I'll do some reflection. I'm still planning on carrying on with the habits um, that I have. Actually, uh, one of my cousins, she is actually sent out a thing where like she's getting signed us up for like 8 a.m. yoga thing. So that should be fun. So it's like,
Nice.
and it's also in identifying the individuals that will resonate more with me, um, and that who I know resonate more with me, and moving more of my time, like that's the thing, is like very carefully looking at the time that I spend, not just like in any situation, even at work. Like I know that this person, we don't resonate, and the way that they live and the way that they want to live is not the way that I want to live. Then I'm very careful with how much time I spend with that person. Maybe it'll be only through necessity of work duties,
Mm-hmm.
where I'll run your food and carry your food to your table for you. But other than that, I won't have too much conversation um, outside of that. And I'm not saying like they ask me a question, I'm just like fuck you. No,
Right. Right.
it's like get out of my face. No, I mean it's like to still be genuine in and of itself, and there's a genuine way of doing that, but you just don't have to invest in the same level of communication.
Right. Yeah. I like it.
And there's one other thing I wanted to note. Like we're talking about introversion and extroversion here. We have agreeableness and disagreeableness,
Mm-hmm.
openness and closedness, or I don't know what the other word for that is. Conscientiousness and I guess disorderliness, and neuroticism and calmness. It's like you have the big five traits, all of those, and there's going to be these niches and elements in each, and that's why I think it's just very important to understand your temperament, because these are large predispositions to how
Mm-hmm.
your behavior is going to be affected by the environment, whether for good or for bad. And just by understanding them, that initial understanding at least gives you the tools to um, to see what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
versus just going through it and being like, oh, I hate this every year when I do this or that in these situations. Why does this always happen?
Right.
You can pull yourself out of that state of confusion. And there are lots of personality tests that you can take, but big five trait tests, I believe, is that'll always be my go-to. I think there's an extremely amount of uh, support for that theory of personality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I like that he talks about this stuff. That's
Mm-hmm.
that was good. I like that you brought up that trip too, because I like getting, I like when this allows us to get more specific because we
Mm-hmm.
always do. Like, it eventually, like, we get to a point where it's like you can't not talk
Oh
about
yeah, we just went off right
something that you
there.
experienced. I love it. For me,
Oh,
that's
it's
what
the
it's all
best.
about, though. It's like, because there's something that when I'm reading these chapters, it's speaking to me in a lot of different ways. And sometimes I don't know necessarily how it is. But then when I'm talking to you, it opens up the door to like really investigating a little bit further. And it's almost like just by talking and discussing these ideas with you, it allows me to kind of navigate through whatever is up here and pull some information that's related and relevant and
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, again, I feel like these conversations always turn into being able to articulate things a lot better, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
taking their ideas, understanding your history and your experiences, and then just really just discussing all that,
Mm-hmm.
communicating that openly.
Well, I get so much growth and understanding and clarity out of it, like you said, like especially with all the ideas that he jumps from, and he really does jump from ideas to ideas, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes he takes big leaps, and it seems very chaotic for a little bit. But like you said, like as we start talking, I'm trying not to just regurgitate. I could easily regurgitate everything you said because I agree with it completely,
Mm-hmm.
um, and how my uh, attitude and what I've gotten out of this too. But no, this that communication. It's like, look, it's like we're exploring unknown territory right now, and if we were to do it when we do it, we initially do it by ourselves, and we map this path, and we run into some dead ends or whatever, but we're continuing the map. But then we're both doing that, and then basically we just double the mapping power that we have when we come together because we
Mm-hmm.
both have already tried. And now when we come together, it's like the bouncing of ideas just allows us to explore so much more
Mm-hmm.
territory in the same amount of time. At least it's how I feel about it.
Yeah.
Um,
It's also really cool that, like, if I share a personal experience and you share a personal experience, it's like, for me, I think that's such a huge thing. For me, it's almost like without having to be in a position of like school or or even like career training, right? Like where you're
mhm,
starting to get experience with clients. It's like before even getting there, like you're telling me a very personal thing and we're able to kind of talk about it and analyze it here now. So for me, it's like for me that's invaluable because it's like it's something that we're both kind of like open to doing, knowing that by sharing these experiences, um, it's just going to give us again just so much a deeper understanding of um, I would say like what people are experiencing in the world, right? Like
mhm.
just other actual things that have happened that for certain because you've shared that, right? Like it's not just my experience anymore. It's like I'm thinking about extroversion, introversion in this one way, and I bring up my experience, and then you give me another one. It's like, oh shit, you just added so much.
It's an extremely efficient and powerful way to transfer wisdom.
Yeah, yeah.
It's through sharing experiences. Because I mean, I do believe that experience will still be the greatest teacher, but you don't need to have that experience to get the same amount of value out of it. Or you can hear somebody else's experience, and I do believe that you can get close to the same amount of value out of that, even though you didn't have it, depending on how open you are to really diving through it, like I said, and analyzing it and understanding it. And as you're doing that, it's going to pop or connect itself
Yeah.
to your own experiences, and then draw these connections and um, reach a deeper synthetic understanding.
Hmm. I was just thinking about something like how you say like it's my personal story, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like it becomes like if we're sharing a story like that and it's like, yeah, let me share a personal story. But when I share it with you in this way and then we talk about it the way that we do, it doesn't become any less personal for me. Like it's still my thing, right? Like I
Hmm.
experienced it, so I have all the thoughts, emotions that are associated with it. But for you, it also becomes personal for you in that I shared it with you and you're open to hearing it. And now you're taking and you're taking what I'm saying, this personal story, as something that actually happened. So it's
Hmm.
empirical data, and it's almost like, okay, well, I can believe that that happened. And then I also, now that you, again, like my personal story does become your personal story too, because of this. Like,
Ah,
you see what I'm
I
saying? Like
like
this
that.
this is our personal experience, like each of us individually, but also on a collaborative and cooperative level. It
Hmm.
Our personal stories also become like, it's all
Well, because this in and of itself right here is our personal experience.
exactly,
I
which is
love
kind
that.
of,
You
that's
just
kind of
made that
weird,
connection for me. I didn't
yeah.
know where you were going at first, but I was liking what I was hearing. But but let me
It
share
makes
one
sense,
more. Let
right?
me share another personal story with you.
Okay.
I have to go to the bathroom. So I'm gonna pause it for a second. I'll be right back. And we're
Recording.
back.
Yeah, I guess we can like maybe just get through this part by just stating like what the other thing that he brought up was, which was a spiritual attitude
Hmm.
versus a materialistic attitude, which is interesting because I think that's something that I've experienced in my own life. Um, coming, being raised very in this materialistic world, and by parents that have materialistic values, I very much adopted, those values and like behaviors. One example is like being a seasonal shopper, right? It's like coming up with a, handful of reasons of why you need to buy clothes every couple of months. Not out
Hmm.
of necessity by any means. It's by purely just indulging yourself, right? Um, and putting value into these products that, you know, have a lot of meaning but don't really fulfill you, right? Like it's really just superficial. Um, but what I was gonna say is like, so materialism versus spiritualism, and then just kind of had my own experiences where I feel like I experienced a transformation of sorts where being spiritual became much more important. It became something that um, was very internal and not about being, things externally, and um, transforming some of those values. And I think it's some of it's still there, and I think some of it will always be there, but it's the degree to which it creates a problem is the biggest issue, right? Like when how do I want to say this? Um, when you're like buying the clothes all the time, when that was a thing, it's almost like you were trying to satisfy something. For
Hmm.
me, at least, I was trying to satisfy this void, and it's like, well, let me just buy more clothes. Let me just give myself that, that uh little thing of joy and happiness in the moment, and not really explore where these feelings of these deeper feelings of like just being very unfulfilled in life. Instead of exploring those, it's let me go buy stuff and distract myself, and it's like that's where it becomes a problem, is when it's you're kind of like keeping things in the fog, as
Hmm.
Peterson would say, right? Like you're avoiding by buying things. And I think that's another thing that he just brings up, where he's like, these are things that are very prevalent and you cannot avoid them, and they're going to come up in therapy. And the way that people the in the ways in which they value either materialism or like spiritual aspects of life is kind of going to provide a lot of information with who it is that you're dealing with and where these problems are coming from.
Hmm.
And he just kind of wraps it up with like, that's another one of his indiciums that thinks that is very important for psychotherapy. And I think it's also, again, another thing too, where we live in a world like with Amazon, the access and the ease in which we can buy stuff is just at our fingertips, and you can have stuff shipped to you in a day. So I feel like if that stuff is providing you with very rapid, satisfying emotions that are not necessarily always good for you, if that's all that you're doing, then that's something that you, again, need a tool set to be able to manage those things. You need to be able to know when to say, okay, am I buying stuff just to buy stuff? Or, is this necessity? Or, let me reevaluate some of, my values along the way. Um,
Mhm.
and it's very much a part of our culture and our society. So again, just very important aspects of psychotherapy and interacting with somebody.
Um, yeah, I agree. I think you articulated that really well. Um, like I think I feel like there's so we I feel like we could talk for forever in regards to materialism and spirituality. Um, but I don't even know where I want to start. um, like to me, maybe I'll just talk about like my relationship with both of them. Like you said, like being born into this material world where we are right now, we are like a mass production society, and like there's I feel that is there's like this um communal urge to just gather, so to
Mhm.
speak, gather, you know, homes, cars, things, whatever. It's like and that it, like you said, like, and that's where like it's so important to understand why you're trying to do this stuff, because it's probably a compensation for something that's missing in value or a distraction from an underlying thing um, within you. And I think I think that, I mean, it can go the same way with spirituality. I think that you can become extremely detached from the world at the same, while you can be, if, it's interesting because there's spirituality isn't very easy to define. Um, but like my experiences with it is that I was never very extremely materialistic. Um, but I mean, in regards to like video games, if you want to call that a material endeavor, then probably, like, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that though, but I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. But spirituality, like when I became very spiritual, I kind of had a spiritual awakening, so to speak, and fundamentally um, picked up picked up New Age beliefs in a fundamental way, where I went more. I just had all these ideas about the nature of the universe and the interconnectedness, and I held a fundamental approach to all of that that made me very naive to how much I didn't know,
Mhm.
and in a way, but at the same time, there was like a principle that I had gotten from, I guess, exploring spirituality, which was to question everything and believe nothing fully. And that eventually just came in and ate its own tail up. And then I was kind of left in this state of like, what to do now? And then Zen came along. And what I got from that was just, um, it was about that you can find a peace of mind and contentment within every moment, and it's where you are, and that like materialism and spirituality, they're both ideas, they're concepts, and you know somewhat arbitrary, but what is certain is immediate experience. And like, I'm getting way above my head right now. I'm also, I'm just gonna stop. I'm getting way off track right now.
Well, let me help you out, because you did say something along the lines of like compensating for something.
Mhm.
Um, And that's kind of like he leads into saying something about that, where he says the human psyche is highly equivocal. In every single case, we must consider the question whether an attitude or so called habitus exists in its own right, or is perhaps only a compensation for the opposite. Um,
Yes. I believe you summed that up initially very well.
yeah. And again, I think that's
I
why.
just went on a random rant, but
No,
it
that's all.
happens.
That's all good. But just yeah, just again, being able to identify those things in people and to explore that and to recognize um, when, because he talks a lot about neuroses and he's talking about um, where how they were formed, right? How they're constructed and what's holding it all together. And these are just things that you're gonna want to know when you're dealing with somebody.
Mhm.
They're things that are very much a part of our reality, I think is a good way of saying it. Um, so yeah, yeah. Again, I just think it's almost like what he has to offer. It's like I'm willing to accept going into this career until he gives me a reason not to, or until you are with the client that again, you're in that position where it's more of a general thing, but then you come across somebody where it's just slightly different, and you have to go into unexplored territory.
Mhm.
So, but again, like I accept all this as like I'm taking all that you're saying into account, and it's like I think it's going to provide me with the tools that I need to interact with people more effectively, right? For
Mhm.
therapy itself to be
Widening the
more effective,
toolkit.
or at least building a very strong foundation built on this kind of experience that
Mhm.
I have yet to have, and someone already has. So yeah, yeah, it's really really good stuff.
Well said.
All right.
Um, there's a quote that kind of summarizes and then shifts into, I believe, the next kind of element that he talks about
Mm-hmm.
of his perspective in therapy. Here we must follow nature. Wait, maybe I want to start before that. I'll start with this. Here you must follow nature as a guide. And the course the physician then adopts is less a question of treatment than of developing the creative possibilities with that lie in the patient himself. And I think what he's saying is, you know, to me, what that tells me is that you're helping guide the patient to uncover his own mysteries, so to speak, and to express them. And um, and in the end, it is him who understand or her who understands um, their own ailments more than anybody else, whether they're not exactly conscious of it, and thus, and then seems like he gets back into dreams for the rest of the chapter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the creative expression that the dreams hold. So what we're going to be talking about here, I believe, is elements of that and how he's kind of given his clients an ability to express through art
Can I?
elements of their dreams.
Yeah. Can I say something real quick?
Mm-hmm.
Just because there's some other things that he says. Like I feel like I had this. I didn't highlight anything, but I had like these. I have all these notes in here, right? Like this is what this looks like. All these purple notes,
I love
all
it.
these tabs. But you were reading part of that paragraph that was talking about follow nature, less a question of treatment than developing the creative possibilities that lie in the patient himself.
Mm-hmm.
Right before that, he said something along the lines of, so we're talking about all these things that he calls indicia, right? Like they're very important factors that you should acknowledge. And he says in the course of treatment and doing all these things and trying to help the person, they're coming to you for help. They are. If this brings about a satisfactory result, then we can let it go at that. So he's saying sometimes, this is what I think he's saying, sometimes it is, you can take it for what it is, right? Like the person comes in and it might be one of these things that he's already identified. And more often than not, they just kind of come in and you treat the person for exactly what it is. And then he says, but if it is insufficient, then for better or for worse, the therapist must be guided by the data presented through the patient's unconscious. And then you read your quote, right?
I knew
We
I
must
should have started earlier than that.
follow nature. But then he also says, I just love this. What I have to say begins with the point where treatment ceases and development sets in, right? And I think that kind of is saying that there are times where, again, you're going to go into this unexplored territory and someone is like, you're going to have to go further in the sense that um like you're not just treating something, but like I feel like that development goes both ways, right? Like for the psychotherapist, you're learning something that was not really, you know, apparent at first, like you had to dig a little deeper. So the psychotherapist is growing, but you're also helping the person develop and kind of like you keep bringing up this idea of a toolkit, which I love. Like you're helping them find the tools that are going to be necessary for them to sustain um, um, some sense of like, I don't even know. I don't know the words, but I don't know. I'm losing it. I really can't just
Um,
like put it together today.
but no, I mean, I'll try and pick up where you left off. Like, um, because of how complex we are, and um, that, like he said, he's not uh, telling them what to do in any kind of way, but just, it's kind of like this patient or this client has doors that he could walk through or areas to explore, and he could go in that naked and alone, or with a map and with maybe a saw or something, or whatever kind of, and they're just, the tools are in this case psychological tools for probing in and understanding the unconscious and elements of the psyche that are in this case causing issues or underdeveloped, and how to and how to uh, you know understand what's going on, and then grow as a result from it. And
Yeah.
there's psychological tools for doing that. One of them is dream analysis. Another is creative expression. Um, and that seems to be what he's tries to offer his patients. And there's one more quote where he says, "My contribution to psychotherapy is confined to those cases in which rational treatment yields no satisfactory results." And, just it seems to me like his focal point has been on, the outliers that don't fit into traditional treatments. And what you're saying, it's like, we can try, if it seems quite clear that it's this problem is stemming from Freud's pleasure principle, or Adler's like will to power, so to speak. And if its interpretation is satisfactory to the client, then you can leave it at that. But
Mm-hmm.
if it's not, well, then where do you go?
Right.
And then that's his territory,
Right.
or at least what, like, the territory that he's trying to navigate. And so, like, all of these things, these other tools of like understanding extroversion or introversion, and spirituality and materiality, are all or they're gonna be important to understand in navigating in territory that is completely unexplored. You need some structure. Because if
Mhm.
you don't have anything to start with, and to me, I see that as like, kind of like checkpoints, or like
Mhm.
starting points that, we can explore a little bit off of this and see where it goes. Doesn't go anywhere, then that doesn't work. So we'll do another one. But if you don't have any of those specific points to start with, well, then it doesn't seem like it's going to be very difficult to develop strategy and understanding of what's going on
Yeah.
in the psyche.
Deep stuff.
This man.
I still can't, like, I'm trying to think. Like, I know he says partially what I'm trying to say, but I feel like I'm trying to say it without going to the book for it. And I'm trying to like understand like treatment and development, right? Like, because if someone gets treated and some of these um things that have already been established like already work for somebody, then it's like why is it the case that that person doesn't require any sort of development? It's like, do they already have the tools, or are they not really experiencing any problems in the world? Like aside from what they came to therapy for, maybe it was just a milder case of something, or something that was simplistic relative to someone else that requires more, right? Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Um,
Or are some people
I
already
think.
able to access their unconscious, you know?
I think what he means by development are individuals, and he says fully 2/3 of my patients have passed um, middle age. And I think in this card, what he's talking about development is in those individuals who are not um, uh, or who are not like okay with sticking to the norm of society and becoming normal again and being normal in everyday life. When he says development here, what I think is that individuals who that they need more, something
Mm,
more out of life, more deeper meaning, deeper expression, or just something else other than the conveyor belt lifestyle, so to speak. And I think a
yeah.
lot of people are perfectly okay with the conveyor belt lifestyle of just going through the motions of society. And then, um, I mean, because if you decide to dive deeper into things, like there was one point in here, where was it? It might be a little far ahead, but I loved it. It was like basically he said something along the lines of that these people find themselves asking a deeper and more dangerous question, which can, I feel like leave you in chaos without structure. Because there are deeper questions that we can ask ourselves that, you know, might not exactly be pleasant to deal with. Like you can stay superficial and kind of just glide through. And now I feel like you might never fall through the ice. You might just continue that until you die, or you might have some experience that knocks you down and you're blown into the chaos that inhabits the world. Um, and then, but and these are I think there's a wisdom and something noble to be found in the one who consciously and courageously dives into the depths of reality or the psyche or your nature. And
Mm,
I don't think that's not necessarily, well, it can be quite a fruitful dive. It can be also quite dangerous for the psyche too. I think some people can lose themselves in it.
yeah. Mm.
It's very not a lot of words
I'm at a
that
loss
help
for
me
words. I think
here.
overall, I just feel like, and it's one of those things where I felt like I had a good understanding of this chapter, but then as we're talking about it, I'm like, I don't know if I didn't understand it as well, or if it's still one of those things where I just can't articulate, or at least, yeah, like pull from what I read. Like it's like I think I understand it, but to say it out loud myself, if I had to like describe this chapter to somebody, it's like I would need the book as a guide, right? Like just the same way that we're doing this now. It's like I need this book as a guide. Like I can't just put this down and really communicate these ideas the way that I'd like to. But I think I understand it for the most part. But yeah, I think it is just, again, I think one of the like things that's very difficult too is like I'm not in a position, like I'm still a student, right? And like I haven't been in this position. So we're reading about this person that has so much experience. And I think sometimes that's difficult because it's like this is what we talked about this with Van Horn. Like this is the wisdom, right? The wisdom that comes through the pages is this person has spent so much time doing these things with these people this way. And he's not just he even within his own, you know, profession, he's trying to push the boundaries of not settling for some theory, right? Like not just saying it's just this, he's pushing further. And there's so much here that I still feel like it's 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 always gonna feel like wow, like just a lot to take in, like very overwhelming. You know what I mean? Because it's difficult to fathom how much experience he's actually had doing all these things with people in the world. You know what I mean? But
And he also has a cascade of understanding of mythological, religious, and uh, understanding that, you know, where he's and that has allowed him to obtain unique perspectives
mm-hmm.
that are very difficult to understand without that background, I feel.
Yeah.
um, and he kind of talks about uh, how having that understanding has helped him with and interpreting the dreams of his clients, um, and that sometimes they paint a very mythological or religious motif, um, and that there's some collective unconscious element there that can be illuminated.
Mm-hmm.
But that's territory that I am well, maybe not. That you know we are not a blank slate when we're born, and for to refer to a study, you take mice, and mice breed relatively quickly, so you can study generations of mice, make them um, valuable in that regard. um, if you take a mice and you have the conditioned stimulus, the smell of a cat. You have an unconditioned stimulus, a bell. Now you ring the bell before you spray cat odor into the cage. Eventually, the mice will just be afraid of the bell. And there's a certain percentage of the offspring obtain that learned behavior. So you have to think about it. Like, if our mythological stories and religious stories are expressions of an underlying nature that exposes itself in if that exposes itself in varying ways depending on what the environment, depending on the environmental pressure, um, that again, so um, that's what archetypes are. They're, you could say, predisposed um, orientations that act as like functional organs for the psyche.
Mm-hmm.
And like even like with that, like they're so I feel like I mean there's a deep mystery that surrounds these things,
Mm-hmm.
but Jung seems to have identified it. It's like these are here. That's what he's saying, and that um, you know in dreams you get a deep understanding and look at them sometimes, and um, and many other things, and that's why is that because like we create these stories and stuff. What they are is they're outgrowths of our psyche. The way he looked at astrology was as if it was a projection of the psyche onto the stars.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, what we create comes from us
Yeah.
in story and literature. So, um, in understanding mythology can provide a unique perspective into understanding the human psyche.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
You want to keep going?
I'm going to try, man. I'm going to try. I'll start with this quote. When we might put it in this way: getting stuck is a typical event which, in the course of time, has evoked typical reactions and compensations. What I was saying with the mouse thing was that we can learn those behaviors from one generation. And it's like, so, we are deeply historic. I mean, we are creatures of evolution. We have massive amounts of information like that built up within inside of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so to see yourself as a creature of deep history, and I think religions and mythologies have been an attempt for us to uh, articulate that and hold it in consciousness and transfer the knowledge along.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, first things we were doing was telling stories, and like they're the quickest way to transfer information and the most easily to relate to and understand. We didn't have writing for a very long period of time, so these stories, you could say, were maintained across long periods of time and were continually, like, if anything was useless, it would have been lost within it. So they become very valuable. But they are originally outgrowths. They become valuable because they tell us what we are and what we're doing. And we don't know what we are and what we're doing. We're trying to discover that. But to continue, like, for example, there's a feeling of getting stuck, which is a typical event in the course of time that evokes typical reactions and compensations. And we may therefore expect with a certain degree of probability that something similar will appear in the reactions of the unconscious, as for example, in dreams. So, if you have specific events that you're going through that maybe your ancestors went through the past 8 generations at the exact same time, or not at the exact same time, but they all had something similar, and you could say your line of evolution has built up a knowledge structure that's innate within you and that comes out in unconsciously.
Right.
That's what he's saying. And that dreams allow that, and then that dreams is a way that expresses itself. And if you can bring that into conscious awareness, it might give you something. Now, he also has a lot of humility in here, but I'll continue with the quote. In such cases, therefore, my attention is directed more particularly to dreams. This is not because I am tied to the notion that dreams must always be called to the rescue, or because I possess a mysterious dream theory which tells me how everything must shape itself, but quite simply from perplexity. I do not know where else to go for help, and so I try to find it in dreams. These at least present us with images pointing to something or other, and that is, at any rate, better than nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I have no theory about dreams. I do not know how dreams arise. I am altogether in doubt as to whether my way of handling dreams even deserves the name of method. But yeah, so like they're not. They, I mean, unless you take on the idea that dreams are random neuronal firing at night, then there's got to be some significance there. And if you deprive somebody of dream or of REM sleep, they become more emotionally unstable. So they certainly hold some kind of regulatory system, and that to me what that shows is that, like, because emotions are more so unconscious. Like, you can't tell yourself be sad. So you can't just be sad. You can't just be angry. You can't just be happy. You have to think of an experience that evokes the expression of anger, sadness, or happiness out of your, like, out of the core of your being, and then it possesses you, so to speak. Um, and I don't know. It seems like dreams have something to do with updating and integrating new information that affects emotion.
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah.
Um, because I feel like there's a point where it's important that he almost described the fact that these people get to a point where they feel stuck, right? Because especially when you talk about, behaviors that are compensating for something, and he brings up this idea of one-sidedness, right? Like you're doing too much of one thing and you're not balanced in that sense. And so you're getting to this point where like you're stuck, and because how you've adapted socially and consciously, what it is that you're doing consciously is very one-sided in that the dream is like, yeah, I like you when he says like pointing you in a direction. The dream is not providing the answer, but it's giving you information that you can explore, that's allowing you to kind of um, get back in touch with that balance, right? Like getting away from being so one-sided in your conscious, more or less waking awakened state, and in the dreams latching onto some of that information and then using it again as a tool, as something to kind of um, help you address some of those more conscious things that you're doing. Um, and yeah, I just think like again the dreams too. Within the dreams, it also seems like your conscious resistance is your defense mechanisms that you've developed are down in the dream state. So in the dream, when people come to him with these dreams, it's probably like, okay, your unconscious is throwing this stuff at you because your resistances are down, and the longer you avoid it, the more your problems are going to persist, and you're going to,
Mhm.
things are going to be worse over time unless you explore these things. So for him, it's always like, he turns back to dreams as, let's use this and let's explore. Like this is not only are we in an unexplored territory as far as the structure of your neurosis, but we need to explore the dreams, which there may be something there if you can begin to make sense out of it. Um, yeah, I don't know where I was exactly going with that. I think I'm just trying to like
No, you just
pull
kind
it
of
all
ground.
together.
You did a good job of like grounding the points there
Yeah.
and synthesizing it. Um,
Yeah, he even said in psychological terms, one-sidedness may lead to a sudden loss of libido. So for me,
mhm.
it's like when I think of that, it's like he mentioned earlier too about like just kind of like losing like that, you know, it, not being in touch with like the enjoying aspects of life, um, and not probably not being motivated, right? Um, um, yeah, I almost think of like you brought up the word the other day, apathy, right? Like kind of
Mhm.
like apathetic towards things,
Mhm.
and like and I think apathetic kind of also relates to that idea of being stuck. It's
Mhm.
like, um, yeah,
It's like a standstill, or or as you would say, disorientation, and senselessness
Yeah.
state, um, that you can find yourself in.
Mm-hmm.
And dreams, as he said, uh, you know, can be something practical and important, can show a practical and important hint that shows the patient in what direction the unconscious is leading him, as he said. He said that there's an element of dreams that can also be prophetic in predicting future. Like, it's like, okay, like I've had those dreams before. Like, dude, can't tell you how many times I've had dreams of taking an orgo test before I had to take the orgo test. It's awful.
Right.
I woke up like, it's done. And then I was like, oh, wait, I have it all. I have it today. It was a
And
dream.
yeah. And what do you think that dream's telling you?
I had figured things out in my dreams that I didn't figure out with orgo.
Yeah.
Um, the dream was presenting because of how the seriousness that I held that class in, and because I truly did enjoy it, but it was one of the hardest class I've ever taken. Um, but there's an element. It was very much like learning a new language. Like everything built off of each other. So my dreams were on the synthesis of what I had learned, and there's a focal point on what I still hadn't learned. And in my dream, it'd be like I'm playing with it and playing with it. I got it or I didn't get it, and I'm still playing with it. And then I did feel that there was like two times where I understood. For example, one of them was on resonance structures, and you know how you move the charges around the molecule, and what the hybrid structure looks like. Ah, fun stuff. But they they definitely like woke me up a lot though
Mm-hmm.
throughout the night.
Yeah.
But maybe it's for the best thing because then I remembered it.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was interesting. It's kind of hard to do a like write about it when it was just like me playing with molecules, so to speak. It's like
Mm-hmm.
not too much of a story there. It was just kind of like a imaginative understanding that came out of it and
Yeah.
solidification.
That's
But
cool.
mm-hmm. Um,
I mean, the rest of this chapter, so he talks about dreams and then he talks about art, right? Like having his patients create art, um, which is another creative outlet to kind of start to make sense
of
out
the
of,
dream.
yeah, like to make sense out of the dream. Um, because the dream is also going to make you feel a certain way. So again, you're starting to kind of um, create something that um, is less. Would you say like it's less abstract? Like it starts to become something that's easier to understand, something that's um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Well, there is something that I wanted to. There's two quotes that I wanted to read before we get into the art. Um, and one thing he says: "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." Um, and then there's another one. Well, all of the works of man have their origin in creative fantasy, and the creative activity of the imagination frees man from his bondage to the nothing but and liberates in him the spirit of play. As Schiller says, man is completely human only when he is playing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like, I mean, that's what we're doing right now. I mean, that's how I see it, at least. Like, we are playing with these ideas, and that is like the attitude where I'm enjoying it in the same time. And um, I think there's a certain opening to growth that comes out of that state.
Mm-hmm. Well, he says something like you know how sometimes like he doesn't explicitly state something, but like in regards to the chapter, he says, "My aim is to bring about a psychic state in which my patient begins to experiment with his own nature, a state of
I had that.
fluidity, change, and growth in which there is no longer anything externally fixed and hopelessly petrified." Um, so again, like I just think that should be emphasized because like it's like, well, what are the aims of psychotherapy? And it's like, well, when psychotherapy gets to this point, that is the aim, right? And
Mhm.
it's I love when he says there is no longer anything eternally fixed and hopelessly petrified, because I think that's again represents this idea of getting stuck and allowing the patient or client to realize that they're not stuck. And this is a way to get unstuck. And it's something that, like again, I guess it kind of like also just makes sense as far as like him talking about the unconscious, him talking about the importance of dreams, and then him now introducing something that someone can do, which is creative expression and using their imagination and kind of playing with the things that are popping up in the unconscious, and um, starting to kind of allow that to be a guide of some sort for that growth and development. But yeah, I mean, other than that, like I don't know how else to like say his ideas without regurgitating what he's saying right now. But and
It's
it's
a
also
very
something too
unique
where,
way of saying things.
yeah, like I haven't messed with dreams in a while. I haven't dealt with anybody, talking about dreams other than maybe talking with you about some dreams and here and there. But like
Hmm.
I never analyzed them too extensively, and yeah, I mean, it just gives me a lot to think about.
Something
And
that I do want to get into sooner than later. I still haven't done it yet, but I will say, like, when I have a dream and I wake up and I remember it, I do think about it a lot more now.
mm-hmm.
I haven't been writing them down, but like, I'll sit with myself for like 10 minutes and just kind of explore it in my imagination.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes they're very clear as to what they're trying to tell me. Other times it's like I don't know what's going on. I'm on some alien planet in a volcano or something.
Yeah.
It's like they can be so random in this, but I don't know.
Well, let's try something. I'm going to tell you about a dream I just had recently. And this
Hmm.
one, I usually don't remember my dreams. And this one really just stuck out to me. And I just want to hear initially what your thoughts are. But in my dream, as far as I remember, a new semester just started. And I was under the impression that I knew all the assignments that were due. I was off to a good start. And then the feeling, it's like no time had passed, but it felt like time had passed. And all of a sudden, I was getting grades back. And then, like, the grades that the stuff that I did hand in were good. But then my teachers were telling me that I didn't hand in other assignments. And then I was like, where were these assignments posted? And they showed me. It was like on the syllabus or on the website. And I'm like, how did I miss that? So now I'm like a quarter into the semester and I'm at like 50% of my total grade for the whole semester so far. And I start going into this panic. And I'm like, now I'm trying to, I feel like I was trying to have conversations with the teacher, like explain to them, like, I didn't see that these were posted. And they were like, well, they were. So I was just terrified, right? Like, this is how did I miss this? And it was just a really overwhelming, put me in a state of anxiety, like put me in this like problem solving mode.
Hmm.
Um, and it was just really bizarre because one, I don't have school for another month and a half. And two, it's like, how did I miss that stuff? What is your thoughts? Like, why am I thinking about that
Oh,
now? Why did that pop up in my dream?
I mean, three kind of words really pop into my head: um, humility, ignorance, and or necessity for humility, downfall of ignorance, and a principle of attention of like to maintain careful focus on your endeavors.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that's just what I think of
Yeah.
when I hear that story. Um, is that like if that were my dream, I'd think of like, um, well, I was overly ignorant and or I had an attitude of ignorance or arrogance,
Mm-hmm.
um, and or like it's some kind of like um, falling in love with the intellect, so to speak, and missing elements of creative work or like missing other things because of that. I don't know, and I guess that's ignorance. But then like principle of humility. There's a fly flying around my head.
Nice.
To just like a lesson of humility and what was the last one that I said? To maintain a watchful eye of.
Yeah.
I've had a dream similar to that where like where did this assignment come from? I never had it.
Right.
I can kind of I feel like I can kind of really relate to that dream.
It was kind of like all the classes in one, though. It kind of felt like all four teachers were saying, like, hey, you turned in the stuff, you did good, but why aren't you doing my other assignments? Basically, was the conversation. And it felt like I was it's like I don't remember having individual conversations with each teacher, but it felt like every class that happened. Like, you know how sometimes like you don't have to have the conversation with every person, but the feeling itself is like it's almost like
Mm-hmm.
you like this. It's like I have an idea of the almost the story that took place, and it's like I have bits and pieces of that stuck with me as far as like what it is that was happening. And the gist of the story was that every teacher was like, "You're doing good, but you've only turned in half of your work." And it's like for some reason I was missing these assignments because I wasn't looking at I was under the assumption that I knew what I had to do and I did it, and yeah, like, and they were like, no, you're missing half of it. And it's like, I guess like some of my thoughts were like, um I think just like almost like not fearing, but like, yeah, I don't know, like being kind of, I guess, maybe scared of the semester coming up, like feeling the pressure of it already
Mm-hmm.
without actually being there, right? So like now
Well,
it's
that's
almost like you're putting pressure on yourself already. So for me it's, how do I manage that now? Leading up to the semester, it's like I don't want that pressure to build before it even gets there. And I don't want the pressure to build while I'm there. Like I need, and maybe it's like, maybe it's an indicator of like, you need to figure out um some things, or like, yeah, I don't know. Like, again, maybe I don't have the right tools leading up to the semester. You know what I mean? Um,
the missing assignments. I mean, that seems to be the focal. Like that's symbol for something.
yeah, I mean, maybe missing the assignments means right now I'm missing something. Maybe something's right there in front of me and I'm not. Like maybe maybe it's saying like, look, in some ways you are prepared for the semester, but in some ways maybe I'm not doing things that I want to be doing to prepare for like areas of like that I would say of like deficits, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
aren't things that I know that I want to improve on but haven't been putting time into.
Mm-hmm. Because there's
Um
always more to do.
right.
There's
And
always
it's
going to
not
be forever more to
right.
do.
And it's not saying that, maybe the dream's not saying that you should feel pressure to do those things, but it's saying that you're neglecting those things, right? It's not like, and it wouldn't even be pressure because if you did those things, you'd almost maybe be more confident going into the semester. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, maybe. But yeah, I just wanted to hear your thoughts
That's
on,
interesting.
I had a dream right there, so we could
I love it.
analyze that a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. It's good stuff.
I do. You got me thinking about like, even though I'm not in school anymore, like, oh my, even though I'm out for the time being.
Hmm. Yeah, because I think sometimes I share things like things about school with people where I talk about this idea of like wanting to get better at being a student, right? And then their immediate response is always, you put too much pressure on yourself. And I'm like, sometimes like I just know that that's not what it is. It's like I'm not putting pressure on myself. It's like I know that something's wrong, like something's out of place.
Hmm.
And I hate when that's just the immediate response, because I feel like that's such an easy way to say like, I don't know what you're going. It's like a way to like not really be empathetic, right?
Well, it's
Like
also
because
a
you're
way
you're not really
to,
hearing me.
yeah, it's also a way to avoid, like,
Avoid problem solving of any sort.
well, yeah, to avoid your own deficit in school.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like, well, that's what people like. For example, like, there are people like when I talk about like what I like fasting and stuff like that, and like my diet, and people make fun of me for it. The individuals that make fun of me for it have extremely unhealthy diets.
Mm-hmm.
And so what it is, I mean, that's a protection mechanism for them. So
Right.
they don't have to deal with that at the time. To me, it seems like the same kind of scenario where, like if they say that that's too much pressure, instead of that being a good, right amount of pressure that you're putting on yourself to allow yourself to grow and develop as a student,
Right.
um, uh, well, if they look at that and agree with that, then if they're not putting that kind of pressure on themselves, then that's going to be uncomfortable and that's going to illuminate a state of fragility in their being.
Yeah.
That's what I think of
Yeah. I
when
like
someone
that.
gives me responses. And that's what I see in other people when they like give me um, kind of try to knock down certain things that I do, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's just so funny to me. It's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're diabetic and the way you eat is going to kill you or give you a cascade of chronic conditions by the time you're 60. And you're
Yeah.
going to sit here and laugh at me. I'm going to
Yeah.
be running marathons when I'm 60. Thank you very much.
That's awesome. My brother just signed up for a marathon. It's pretty cool.
Hey,
Yeah.
which one?
Something in November. I don't know which one, but
Nice.
it'll
I'd
be
like to
cool.
do one at some point. I've only run a half marathon, not officially, but just kind of had like 6,000 calories of McDonald's food the night before. And back when I was like running heavily, and I was like, let's go. I didn't eat
Yeah.
anything the next day. So I was like fasted, but I had eaten so much McDonald's food that my stomach was like hurting the next day because of how big it was. Not, yeah, it was rough. That was like back in like before I was super like diet conscious, but
Mm-hmm.
then I just like went for a run and just didn't stop. It's just
Yeah.
like, just keep going. Got a runner's high. Yeah, I just kept going. It got to the point where my legs were like, they started to hurt because I was like
Yeah.
pushing myself past my limits.
Yeah.
Definitely recognized that. But the
Yeah.
euphoria that I felt after that run was,
Probably during too at some points.
oh yeah. I mean, the runner's high that I got during it, it was clarity of thought that comes with running that I
Yeah.
find is, I love it. I even like stop listening to music when I run. And if I do, I listen to like beats, like
Yeah.
repetitive beats to kind of allow me to like fall into like a smooth, um, therapeutic thought
Mm-hmm.
where like I'll like think about everything going on without judgment
Yeah.
and just analyze it and try to see it more clearly.
Mm-hmm. Nice, dude.
Hmm. I'm about to go
Well,
for a run after this.
yeah, I'm gonna take a break from this. I have hockey soon.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. We've been at it for a.
I can't tell if I'm like out of it today or if like again I'm just he just gives me so much to sometimes when like this happened with Van Horn too. Sometimes they're giving you so much to think about
Van Horn, that,
that
that happened with
that you
me
don't
on
have
his
much to
podcast.
say, right? It's
Hmm.
like you're just kind of processing, and it's like fuck. It's like, and you realize how much that this person has to offer in the moment. And I feel like that's what I'm getting from this book, which is it was just very unexpected. Like when you suggested this book, I was never, I was not ready to go in on any young stuff. it's just been great. It's been such a great
I'm
book.
glad you've been enjoying it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we could do a whole podcast on the last 4 or 5 pages of this chapter. It's ridiculous,
Mm-hmm.
but we'll figure it out.
I'm glad we did it though. I think one thing that I always appreciate is anytime you can stop recording if you want
Yeah, I'll
to.
stop it now. Thank you for listening. Hope you have a wonderful day. Post your comments. If there's anybody here by chapter 3, we love you and appreciate you.
Yeah.